Now the Shaykh goes in the interesting chapter. Benefit and fame are not enough as a praise. If somebody says to you, so-and-so is a good speaker, a good lecturer, a good scholar, because he's famous, that is not sufficient. Says the one, for example, who praises a man or is praised, or praises a book or recommends it based on the fact that people benefited from it, or that the book has reached the East and the West, then this does not indicate that, so this would indicate reliability, then this does not suffice alone in being a book, or a person being upon the Sunnah, or being from Ahl Sunnah. And the people of innovation, they benefit from the people of innovation and their books. Whereas Ahl Sunnah, they benefit from their people and their books. Very important. Fame doesn't mean someone is good. For example, there's books people of innovation wrote, the whole world, there's book copies of it. There's books people of Sunnah wrote, the whole world has copies of it. It doesn't mean the book is good or bad just because it's famous. Because who reads the books of the people of innovation? Them. Hence they published it. And who reads books of the people of Ahl Sunnah? Us, Ahl Sunnah, so we published it. So the book's fame or how many copies it published doesn't suffice. Nowadays, if speaker being popular on YouTube, how many subscribers? Doesn't suffice. Notoriety or fame doesn't mean someone is good. And that's why we say someone is famous or infamous. Right? What does infamous mean? He's famous in a bad way. Wasn't Ahl Bid'ah in the past famous? Yes, some of them we told today we know them. Jahm bin Safwan and Jarh and Jarh and these people who we know their names. And then Ahl Sunnah also famous. So the scholars talk of fame itself can go both ways. The Shaykh, what he's telling us, Shaykh Abdul Salam, what he's saying here, rahimahullah, very important. Because many lay people, when they want to find out who's the best Shaykh, they just Google and they find in the YouTube or anywhere, the one who has most followers, he must be good. The whole ummah agreed. No, not true. Because if many people listen to him, it still could be bad. And now, the Shaykh says, I'm going to give you two examples. One of a book and one of a speaker, which are bad, and as scholars explain why they're bad, despite them being famous. The Shaykh, what this lecture is, why it's beneficial, he gives examples. Because the examples clarify the principle. But before we get there, what's the proof that fame doesn't mean someone is knowledgeable upon the Sunnah or guided? The hadith, many of us we know, hadith Abu Sa'id al-Khudri radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, about the man who killed 99 men. Everyone knows this hadith, the man who killed 99 men, then he completed with 100. Here in this hadith, it mentions, he asked the people, right, who is the most knowledgeable of them? So he could ask them about the Tawbah, and they pointed him to a monk. So he went to the monk and he asked the monk whether or not his Tawbah will be accepted. The monk said, no, he won't. So he killed him too, so 100. The people all pointed to the monk as knowledgeable. He's famous, but he was jahil. He was famous. But what did it benefit him? Got him killed because he was ignorant. But what's important in this hadith, Shaykh Muqbil rahimahullah pulls from this good benefit from one of his fatwa and his website. He says, we do not consider a person as a scholar or not a scholar just because they're fame. Ash-shuhratu la takfi fi hada. Fame doesn't benefit in this. And later he says, هذا دليل. This is evidence, this hadith. على أننا ما نغتر بالشهرة. We don't get deceived by fame. Others, when he asked the second time who was knowledgeable, it took him someone who wasn't as famous, but he was alim. Today, me and you may be judging based on TikTok followers, YouTube followers, Instagram followers. Is fame going to tell you who's guided? And some people say, but they're the ones in front of the camera. Doesn't mean that the ulama. Doesn't mean that people invest to it. This hadith, keep it in front of you, always remember. We should teach the people around us, just because someone is famous doesn't mean that he's good. It could be possible someone's famous and knowledgeable. Both are true. And it's possible famous and misguided. Example, in the past, almost all the ulama we know of were famous in their time and after their death. And they're upon the Sunnah. Like Imam Ahmad, rahimahullah. In his time, he was so famous, even the Jews and Christians would come to his house to visit him and to see him. And then came to Islam just because of his example, role model. He was famous. He said, I was tested by fame. Imam Ahmad was Imam Ahl Sunnah Jama'ah, famous and upon the Sunnah. Before him and after him, people of innovation, famous, but no good. So remember the hadith of 99 men. And this will also take us away from the idea of judging by numbers alone. What does Allah tell us about the numbers? They suffice in telling us who's guided and who's misguided? No. Allah says if you were to follow most people on the earth, they would misguide you from the straight path. Which means that while the number of the people of Sunnah increasing is something very good, it doesn't mean that at one time period or one locality, if there's a small number, that they're not guided. Okay? Sometimes they could be large, small. It's a very important principle, brothers. We should take this hadith with us and remember that. Because ulama are the ones who have the knowledge and they have signs, as we'll get to later. To finish, the Shaykh will give now the example for today's lesson. We're going to stop on the example of one individual who is famous but he's not good. And the Shaykh gave the example of Al-Mawdudi. Many of us, we might know him, might not know him. And we'll read what the Shaykh he says about him. And he gave him as an example of someone very famous as an Islamic scholar, thinker, who was misguided. He says the example, Abu al-A'la al-Mawdudi. He died 1979. He's an Indian Islamic scholar, founder of Jama'at Islami. Okay, he's a founder of political Islam. Many of us, we probably see his works. And the Arab world, a lot of his work was translated. But what do we know about him? So the Shaykh mentioned that he was a famous author, political activist, because he formed a party, a political party, and he had much influence in the subcontinent, India's subcontinent, and even the Arab world. He's actually the influencer who influenced Sayyid Qutb in Egypt. He influenced him. He is the father of Islamic politics. At the same time, Shaykh mentions that despite this, and he has so many books and lectures which are popular, we find that some of the scholars of his own homeland, from a great jama'ah called the Deobandiyya, ulama of Deoband, they refuted and warned against him in his own land. So many people wouldn't know the Shaykh said he has the fatwa translated into Arabic from Urdu. And that shows you, he says, that at his own time, despite his fame, some of the people of knowledge in his own land, yes, despite their own issues and misguidance, they warned against him. So what's interesting is that someone could be famous at the same time also not good. But people wouldn't know. They might know he's only to be famous. Now someone will say, okay, Abu A'la al-Mawdudi, what's wrong with him? Abu A'la, what's his mistakes? Because we need to know, the Shaykh is giving him as an example of someone misguidance, right? Someone may ask you, why is Mawdudi not good? You cannot say he's not good just because. We have to have a reason. So some of the ulama, they compiled some of his beliefs or his views as found in his work and in his tafsir, Tafhim al-Quran. One of the things that we noticed, Mawdudi, he's the founder of Tawheed al-Hakimiyyah. Pay attention, but he's the first. He preceded everyone in the idea of Tawheed, of Allah's rulership. Any one of us, how many categories Tawheed is there, brothers? 3. Does anyone believe there's a fourth one called Hakimiyyah? No, because we know that is not what the ulama past and present have agreed to. Tawheed al-Rububiyyah, Tawheed of Allah's lordship, Tawheed al-Uluhiyyah, Tawheed of Allah's worship, and Tawheed al-Asma' wa Sifat, Tawheed of Allah's names and attributes. Rulership and Allah's right to sovereignty and rulership falls either into Rububiyyah or Uluhiyyah. Usually they mention one of the two. They don't mention a separate category. He's the founder of this idea. He also is the founder of the first concept or the idea of Islamic politics. Islamic politics. Siyasa, it's not Islami or Shari'iyya. When we talk about siyasa, that we're talking about here is political activism. Islam is rooted in just developing and establishing and solely focusing on Muslim governorship and rulership. That's it. So when you read his tafsir, you see everywhere he talks about every prophet and messenger as simply trying to establish the hukm of Allah. Nuh alayhi salam, he said he was trying to establish the government. When we read the book in the Quran, we don't see that. Is this what Nuh was doing all this time? 950 years to da'wah and more. He was calling to what? Government. Then he moves to Musa alayhi salam and he makes it all about the government. No tawheed, doesn't talk about any of that because he removed the uluhiyyah and he substituted it towards the hakimiyyah. He has a book, Mustalahat Arba'a, the 4 principles, the 4 letters of treaties. You see it even in English. That book, if you go to it, you'll find these statements of hakimiyyah and about rulership. And the one who doesn't have those He's not a proper Muslim. In fact, he's not even a Muslim, the one who has problems in rulership. Some ulama follow up all his statements, and they found that he even claimed, right, statements and things about Fir'aun and Namrud which were not accurate about what they believed. Ultimately, the summary of Mawdudi, issues in Tawheed, issues in Aqidah, issues in methodology, for example, the idea of overthrowing governments and establishing Islam, all those are fundamental issues. So due to this, our ulama have ruled that this shaykh, this da'iyah, is not a person of guidance, not to benefit from him. What did they base their ruling on? Fundamental principles. That's what we're trying to take from. Nowhere did they say that Mawdudi is not good because he was from India. They didn't say that. They didn't say Mawdudi is not good because he didn't study with our ulama. They didn't say Mawdudi is not good because of other things. They looked at his beliefs and his teachings and his methodology. Even he has some very bad speech about Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam, describing him with despicable terms. In the book, the tafsir is in English, translated. Anyone who wants to go, can read it. But what we take from this, when the ulama warn against al-Mawdudi, now we see it's not a warning that comes from a place of bigotry, hatred. It comes from principles. Then, when we're doing jarh on someone, criticizing them, to the point where we say they're not in Ahl Sunnah, we're going to learn later, it must be in fundamental issues. We're going to talk about the tafsir of that, the details of that. Very important, brothers. Not subsidiary issues or secondary issues alone. For example, we know Mawdudi was a Hanafi. There's even a story of Shaykh Hamad al-Ansari, rahimahullah, visited him one day at one of the hotels, and he found him praying the Hanafi way. And he said to him, we thought someone like you, based on your work, would be someone mujtahid. Why are you blind following the madhab Hanafi? He said, that's because I'm a Hanafi. He didn't have a jawab, and they just left. But they didn't, when you look at the criticism of the ulama, they didn't use this alone. Even though this happened, it's not alone, they need more. Hence, if we are me and you see now, when the ulama speak about certain characters or individuals, look at how they pay attention to what person believes, what they call to, what they teach, and how it goes against the Quran and Sunnah. They don't say things that we see today, unfortunately. So-and-so, he's like this, and if we're telling you someone is a thief, very bad. That's not going to mean he's a mubtadi', right? He's a thief. He doesn't have just trustworthiness. Today we have all this personal and dirty laundry that is aired as a jarh wa ta'dil. Worse, cutting people's pictures and other weird things you find today, almost embarrassing. I think that this will pass as the principle of jarh wa ta'dil.